don't block the path of inquiry. Don't lay down rules that make it impossible for people to ask important questions.
Welcome to the ThoughtStretchers podcast, where we hope to stretch your thinking about important issues in education through rich inquiry. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm your host for these conversations for complexity and nuance. Hello again, and thanks for tuning in. I always appreciate those folks who listen and share our work, should you be so inclined. A few announcements. First off, early bird registration is now officially open for our PBL Grow 24 event. So if you're an educator, whether you're a teacher or a school leader who wants to know more and build foundational understanding of project-based learning, this is a good event for you. June 24th through 26th in Louisville, Kentucky. We will return to the Fifth Third Club Room at Lynn Family Stadium, which was a great venue last year. And there you can learn project-based learning by doing project-based learning. And you can learn more about that event and register for early bird registration, which is available until March 31st at wegrowteachers.com/grow24. As always, all of our professional development is at wegrowteachers.com. But of course, we have our new ThoughtStretchers education community, which is at ThoughtStretchers.org. And I invite you to check that out and sign up, and especially take a look at the list of events that we have on slate for this spring and more to come. As always, please feel free to reach out to me with any comments, questions, concerns, or ideas at drew@thoughtstretchers.org. In this episode, I spoke with Yunga Webb, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at North Country School, which is a pretty unique school in upstate New York, 4th through 9th grade, and they have an emphasis on farm to school, cross-curricular approach, and experiential learning in the arts every day. They have a state-of-the-arts performing center, and we talked quite a bit about DEI and her role, and I asked her about her training and some of the foundational pieces she uses. We talked about some of the tensions and concerns between identity and valuing and prioritizing that, and some of the tensions with our shared humanity. And although we didn't have as much time as I would have liked, we definitely got into some pieces that hopefully are helpful as you think about the complexity and nuance of doing DEI and this kind of approach. I appreciate Yunga coming to the podcast and talking with me about these kinds of things, and I urge you to check out North Country School's website and their work because it looks pretty interesting. And here's my conversation with Yunga. I am here with Yunga Webb, and we're going to talk about her work with North Country School, and seems to be a pretty unique school. Lots of, features that make it unique. But before we get into that, I want to give Yunga an opportunity to say hello to folks who are listening, and give a little background on herself, and introduce herself and those kinds of things.
Thank you so much, Drew. Yes, I'm Yunga. Nice to meet everybody out there in podcast land. And I am new to this region, the North Country. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, grew up in Las Vegas, California, and Utah, and moved here in 2022, August 3rd, 2022. So I have spent my first winter here. I made it, and I'm now enduring my second. I took a job at North Country School. I'm an educator for almost 20 years. Performing arts, actually. I was a director for all the school musicals, school plays, handbells, choirs, everything performing arts. And then initiated my diversity, equity, and inclusion program at my last school in Newport Beach, California. That school was Harbor Day School, and it was a wonderful 8-year stint that I was there. Once my daughter went away to college and left me alone, I said, you know what, let me move closer, but not right next to her. So she went to college at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And so I took this job here at North Country School as it was an inaugural position, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I knew that this was the place I needed to be, even though it was polar opposite from the last location I was geographically, culturally, and all things. But I knew that this would be a good fit for me because I felt that the mission and values of the school were in alignment with the way I lead and my purview of how education should go and all of the work that I'm doing. And I felt like they were not trying to check a box. They were looking to really make some good, sustainable change. And that's where I want to be. So that's where I took this job.
Okay, and I don't know if you said it, but North Country is in Lake Placid, New York, so that's why she's bemoaning the cold weather, I suppose, enduring the winter and I suppose long nights and shorter days, probably kind of thing. Las Vegas certainly can get cold, but it's not quite the same weather as Lake Placid. I'm certain of that. I've not been to Lake Placid, but
Yes.
what was your you mentioned some of the previous I guess experience that you've had, but I'm curious, where did you grow up and what was your schooling like as I guess a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up from 1 years old to about 15 years old in Las Vegas, Nevada. I come from a large family, 8 kids, 2 parents. My parents valued education. They both have master's degrees, and they put us. My foundational years were at the Meadow School, which is an independent school in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's quite the school now. When I went there in the 80s, it was trailers and ideas and people who were excited and hopeful. And the only Black family that was there was my family, and so I went there from kindergarten to 7th grade, and then I went into performing arts schools, and actually left Las Vegas and moved to Los Angeles by myself to pursue my performing arts dreams and ambitions when I was a junior in high school. So I've been in the arts for many years, and my parents are non-traditional type folks, and so they said, hey, where do you want to follow your dreams? Let's go, let's set this up, let's make it happen. So they gave me such a great strong educational background, and then also enabled me to pursue the dreams that I had at the time.
Can you say a little bit more about sort of the educational approach, like just from a pedagogy standpoint? I'm curious, that school that you mentioned, from I think 1 to, well, you probably weren't in school at 1, maybe you were, but up to what I think you said 15 or something like that.
Yes, I went there from kindergarten to 7th grade, the Meadows. And because I was in elementary school and early middle school years, all I know is that they valued inquisitive, critical thinkers, kids that really didn't just take the answers and write them down. They wanted to ask questions. Dr. Mobley was its founder. She died even while I was still there. And then I think Carolyn Goodman, who was the mayor of Las Vegas, replaced her. But I think all that happened after I left. In terms of pedagogy in middle school, I'd have to revisit what it was, but I know that it was academically rigorous. We had to be tested to go to the school. Like, they didn't accept anybody. And three of the, I guess there were probably 5 of us at the time, were accepted into the school and were able to learn how to study and learn how to think critically. And I think that early foundation kind of set the stage for the rest of my life, to be honest.
Well, I asked that just because I would imagine you would style yourself, or I guess, if we were going to label people, progressive or traditional educators, I'd say you're probably in the more progressive side, at least if I'm understanding North Country School and the way that they're thinking about and approaching education. And so when I talk with folks, it's always interesting to me to have some of that context of where people think, how people think about education. I do lots of discussion and talk about sort of the tension between sort of more traditional direct and explicit instruction kind of thing, and the importance of knowledge, versus a more progressive kind of education, which tends to be more inquiry and constructivist and critical thinking, and maybe in some cases, I think this is a problem, but sort of de-emphasizes the importance of knowledge and direct instruction and that kind of thing. And there's a whole spectrum. So to me, that's an interesting sort of tidbit of background as you think about what we value in education and how we think about, using those approaches or this approach and that kind of thing. So with all of that said, tell us about North Country School. I'm looking at the website, a boarding and day school for students in grades 4 through 9. It's a pretty narrow band. I'm imagining there's some reason for that narrowness in the band. And it is living in the mountains on a sustainable farm. And I mean, there's all kinds of moving parts here. So, give us the elevator pitch, I guess. And the elevator ride can be fairly long if you need to.
Oh, well. First, I do want to comment on your last statement about this. This North Country School space that I occupy now is definitely a progressive education. It's at its inception. I grew up with a good blend of traditional and progressive education. So, and then my last school was definitely much more of a traditional school. So, to your point, I think that there's value in both, and understanding what works in both aspects, but understanding that the world is changing and we need to change along with it while remaining true to who we are. So, just to kind of put that out there. This place, so you want me to give an elevator pitch. I still feel very new to this space, especially since, like you said, it's a sustainable farm in the mountains. And I am probably one of the few, I can count on my hands, people that I may be the only one that is not an outdoor person in any imagination. I would like to wear my heels on a paved sidewalk as I go from my school. But that is not the existence that I occupy.
Yeah,
but
I'm not seeing a lot of high heels on the website.
No. And I don't think I own them anymore. I may have one pair somewhere, but I'm definitely more of a boots wearer now, just to kind of get to where I'm going from. But this is a really cool place because not only do they teach what's happening, the kids then go out and do. And we know as educators how important it is to retain and learn things, and using your hands and actually engaging in a process. Students will retain what they've learned. For example, in a math class, they may be learning about math and measurements and things, and then we're going out and sugaring. We're tapping trees for to make maple syrup, and there's a math element to that, so they actually can put it to work. Or in science classes, studying the life cycle of a baby lamb, because we have them in our farm. So I really love the place-based aspect of this place. It really engages students in a way that I know traditional schools don't necessarily do, just by standing up and listening to a lecture. And for me, I'm an auditory learner, so I need to be able to hear it and then repeat it and teach it. So I love the diversity of how we teach here at North Country School.
So what is your position exactly, and can you talk about the work that you're doing there, and maybe even why you were drawn? Obviously, you mentioned sort of being a little closer to your daughter, but there's lots of geographic spots that could be closer to, I think you said Howard. So tell us a little bit about that and the work that you're doing.
So my title is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And as you know, when during COVID and during 2020, when everybody was having a bit of a reckoning, it was like, whoa, there's something going on in our country. We need to fix it. And so there were a lot of independent schools that were like, we need somebody in place to make sure that we're fighting against systems that we don't see or that are blind spots. And so this position came available 2 years ago. They didn't have this full-time position. And so when I came, I had the pleasure and the challenge of creating the position and gearing it towards what's best for this institution, which I think is really more of a benefit than anything. It does take a little bit of time to understand, but it wasn't trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I spent the first year really trying to understand the community and what the needs are and the desires. This is a unique community in the sense that at its inception, almost 100 years ago, it was integrated. They don't have the same background as most independent schools, where they were getting away from integrated schools. So they wanted to create a special space for just kids who could afford it, just kids that look like them. This community has always been inclusive of all races. And so even in the 40s, the 30s and the 40s. So my job, I don't like labels. I don't like buckets. I don't like to put people in boxes. I like to see what's really going on and how can we be better at it. So when I came, I spent a lot of time listening, putting my ear to the ground and learning and understanding where we can do better, and how that looks. So for example, part of my programming is allowing people to have the language and the conversations as to why some people feel like they belong and why some people feel like they don't belong. What is the history of acknowledging a land? Because one thing we really value here at North Country School is the land and stewarding the land. And so, of course, that brings up the topic of Indigenous populations and how we got here and why do we do land acknowledgements, and is it performative or are we really trying to be authentic? So just looking at what they really value and putting programming around that is kind of been my approach as the director.
Okay. And I know you're working there. So there's a performing arts center, which is a bit of a, I guess, a different idea if I'm thinking of a school that's sort of based in farming and, connecting with the land. So I guess sort of tell us a little bit about that, and how does it fit and connect to the sort of outdoor experience, kind of, not heels but boots.
Yes, my boots are still very fashionable. Just want to put that out there.
Because you might wear boots in performing arts, but you might wear lots of other, shoes.
I will say that that is really what solidified my desire to be here. When I saw their new performing arts center and saw that they have arts every day, because the arts are one of the signature programs. There are 3 signature programs: the arts, performing and visual, the farm and garden, and the outdoor education. So when I saw that the arts were valued to the degree they're valued, that told me a lot. And that's because I know the arts. Like, I come from an arts background. So much quality, sustainable, authentic education comes through the arts. And so when I saw that they value that, I said, oh, I can do my work here easy. Being in the arts and participating in the arts creates a sense of empathy that people don't even realize. Empathy is at the core. Just being able to offer children the chance to participate in like theatrical stories that are played out on stage, it allows them to step into someone else's world, creating empathy in a way that like regular life couldn't. And that it also does that for the audience that is watching. It takes you out of realness and puts you into somebody else's realness. And I think at the core of the work that I do, and at the core of any DEI work, is empathy if you're doing it correctly. And so that is kind of why the arts are important to me and how I'm able to foster this work through the arts here.
So obviously DEI is a hot topic, right? I'm sure you're aware, right? It's been in the news a bit here and there. So I'd like to sort of unpack that a little bit and get your thoughts on what you think that means and how that manifests and looks. What are maybe some concerns and some things to be aware of? I know you mentioned the sort of performative idea of land acknowledgements, and I think it sounds like maybe we both agree there's some of that certainly going on. So when you think about DEI and your work with DEI and how that looks, where do you sort of root that in? What are the sort of foundational thinkers and concepts that you use or apply in the work that you're doing in that space?
Well, gosh, that's so complex. I am fully aware that the pendulum is swinging back against such a shift that we made just a few short years ago to acknowledge things that we haven't quite acknowledged so specifically in the past. But it doesn't worry me or concern me, because what that does is it weeds out those who are doing it for the wrong reasons or not doing it correctly. Then yes, that isn't helpful. To me, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is about every single person. It's not only about marginalized people. It's not only about this group or that group. It's about all of us and how we work together, and that's our country. We're all so unique and so different, and we all come from different backgrounds, have different lineage. We're set up in life different ways. So how can we, as such a diverse country, work together? And how can we ensure that everybody has opportunities to be great? That's what we want in this country. And then how can we all have a sense of home, like this is mine, ownership. I love being here. This is my country. That is all diversity, equity, inclusion is. And there are a lot of buzzwords that scare a lot of people that don't know a lot of things. And there are a lot of buzzwords that people take and create to make it something different. But all it is making sure that every single person in our space is valued, and that we champion them. And in the space of education, if you ask a parent, like let's say a parent is like, I don't want my student learning about this DEI stuff. I don't like this new age stuff. My first question, and I've had these conversations with parents, my first question is, so do you want us to value your child? Well, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that's all we're doing. We're just taking care of your child, and that goes for everybody. So like I said, I get rid of the labels, I get rid of the titles, I get rid of the boxes and I'm on this side, I'm not on that side. And I get to what is at the core of it. And what is at the core is building strong communities that people can thrive and survive and thrive in. So I think that's why I felt success in my space. And if you are not on board with that, then to me, that's the minority. If you only want you to succeed and you only want you to feel comfortable and you don't like other people, that's an alternative situation.
Yeah, I certainly can get on board with that, and I think lots of folks can. But I can also hear, sort of the those who are sort of suspicious of DEI and that kind of effort. One thing, and I guess maybe let me ask, sort of as a follow up before I ask the other question that was ruminating in my head. When you did you do training to sort of get to this space, and what was that like? What were some of those foundational thinkers and sort of the theories or that kind of thing that you use in that work?
Yeah. So yes, my life experience, I've grown up in predominantly white spaces my entire life with a full Black family and 2 Black parents. So I had a sense of identity of who I was, but I also have been able to thrive and feel very comfortable in spaces where nobody else looked like me. So that foundation and being in education led me to go to a university where I went to BYU University, or Brigham Young University, where very, that was very homogeneous. I got my undergrad in sociology, study of people and human behavior. And it was fascinating and exciting to me, and what move the way they do. Then I went on to teach and got my master's in education, instruction and curriculum. And then towards about five years ago or so, maybe a little bit less than that, I learned about Cornell University's diversity and inclusion training on how to be a facilitator of this work. So that is my formal education. I got my D&I certificate from Cornell University. My undergrad in sociology, my master's in education, instruction and curriculum, along with my life experience, and then the countless workshops and books and opportunities that the National Association of Independent Schools has a plethora of resources for educators on how to best practices, how to do what you're doing and do it well. And I have been blessed to go to a school where they value professional development. And so every year I go to People of Color Conference or the National Association of Independent Schools Conference, read books from Majareen Banaji. I know I'm not saying her name right, who did Blind Spot, talked about implicit bias. So many speakers I've listened to, books I've consumed. Some things I'm like, whoa, okay, that's extreme. Okay, well, cool, that's a great perspective. Oh, I'm learning about this. All the way to 35 dumb things well-intentioned people say. So I don't follow any one person's school of thought. I'm a consumer of knowledge, and then I filter it out in my own system. And then depending on where I am, what I'm doing will look so different at a different school. And I think any good educator will tweak that for the people that they serve. So when I was at my last school and leading the work, it was a lot more about just understanding that these things exist, the scientific research behind implicit bias, like how we are constantly we're moving so fast. We are judging things because we can't afford to process every little thing and every moment. Whereas here at North Country School, I'm able to talk about belonging in a sense. This community is very open and anybody can be a part of the community. But I have felt one of the challenges is, well, you need to like this. So yeah, you're a part of us if you like these things or if you do these things, and those things I don't do. I don't want to hike all the 46 peaks. I don't care. I'll take a walk, but I would prefer to be on a treadmill at the gym. So I'm just teaching my colleagues and the students that it's okay that I don't need to hike the 46 peaks. We can still be cool. And guess what? There's beauty in running on the treadmill as well. Like, it's okay. So it just looks different wherever you are. I don't know if I answered it.
Yeah, well, excuse me. I would strongly disagree with the beauty in the treadmill idea, but you can have your position there. Well, so one of the things that you mentioned, and it strikes me as a tension, and we talk about this in our work with schools sometimes when we're not working. We have an objective pluralism workshop that we do, and really thinking about how we have that viewpoint diversity and pluralistic and that kind of mindset. And identitarianism is something that I find to be troublesome if it's a really dominant sort of priority, right? That one's identity is the most important thing about them. And so when you talk about not having labels and sort of getting away from labels, I'm wondering how you think about if you see any sort of tension between that, right? So not that somebody's identity isn't important, but to me, when we want to think about, again, connecting and belonging, sort of the shared humanity that you and I have, even though we have different identities, as does everybody, that sometimes it seems to me that in the sort of DEI space that there can be and often is a sort of elevation of identity to the number one priority. And what that does, the sort of opportunity cost, if you will, is that we can lose that shared humanity piece. So how do you think about those tensions?
Yeah, and this won't be super popular amongst a lot of other folks that do what I do, but no, I don't lead with that. It's identity is real, and I also don't agree that we should disregard one's identity, especially if you're from a historically marginalized, if you have aspects of your identity where you're constantly having to fight, whether you're a woman trying to speak up in a man's world, or somebody who's disabled. So to disregard the challenges that are part of your identity is problematic. So I will start by saying that. But I also feel like I want to know who you are. And and once I know who you are, then I can love you for who you are. Then we can work together and figure it out no matter what your identity is. So I think that's the place to lead. I don't like to engage in conversations where I meet somebody and they tell me this is who I am. This is the label. These are the labels you need to, this is my label and that's it. But that is out of hurt. When people need to stand on those feet and tell people, it's because they have been hurt. So I think to turn that conversation around is to honor them and their identity, whatever that is. Oh, I see you as a Black woman, Yunga. I see you. Cool. Now tell me more about you. Now those pieces of our identity doesn't matter, because what matters most is who you are. Like outside of the labels, my womanness, my Blackness, my middle classness, my heterosexualness, or my Christianness, whatever it is, all those things are valuable. But at the core, getting to know somebody, who they are, and love them for who they are, that's when we're going to get over hurdles. When we honor people and love them for who they are, even within what their identity, and respect who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, and again, I can't find any way to disagree with that. I really do think it's a difficult balance and sort of tight rope to walk sometimes, partly because we've got such an us versus them sort of mindset, and DEI and CRT and all these kinds of things are sort of weaponized labels and that kind of thing. People who listen to this podcast regularly know that I'm pretty skeptical of the idea that critical race theory, quote unquote, whatever you want to use as DEI, has sort of infected all of our schools. But I do think, I think there are certainly some examples where we see in certain hot spots of big cities, West Coast, East Coast, that kind of thing, where it can be, I think, a bit extreme or excessive, just like you might see versions of, very sort of evangelical Christian kind of orthodoxy in other spaces. And so it's that orthodoxy that I really want to get people to think about, whether it's from the left or from the right, and I see it both, right? One of the things that makes it really hard in education, because it tends to be more left-leaning, right? It's more sort of sympathetic to DEI and social justice and that kind of thing, is the difficulty of being able to talk about some things, right? So to be able to ask the hard questions and to say, well, I wonder about that, or I'm not sure about that, or, if you're talking about history, to ask questions whether they're sympathetic with sort of social justice or not, and being able to have those conversations. And I'm wondering if you encounter that and how you sort of navigate that with sort of norms, expectations, processes, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges and why we're struggling so much is we have a hard time talking to each other. This is in response to people's hurt and people's experience, and what I see happening with this pushback. And first off, there's a lack of education in so many places. People don't even know what they don't like. Like I said, when people are like, I don't like this, it's like, oh, you don't like your child feeling like they belong, or you don't want to feel like you belong? Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, that's all that is. It is. So once you're educating yourself on, you've got to continue to educate yourself. We have to continue to educate ourselves on what's actually happening. Yeah, we have to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What I do, how I like to lead my meetings, yes, just the mere fact that, some of us are listeners and they just want to sit back and they want to listen. Others, they're talking, so they want to talk and they just want to get their next point in. So I always start my meetings with community norms or rules of engagement. This is how we're going to do it. Each person's going to get 1 minute. And even if that person says 3 words in 1 minute, they get their full minute, because 3 more words may come out at second 56, 57, and 58. So allowing people to have the space to talk, breaking down those walls and those boundaries so that everybody has room to be, everybody's valued. There's no more valuable voice. Like, no one voice is more valuable than another. So yes, we have to learn to speak to each other. And the problems I'm seeing in the world is, one, a lack of education and understanding, and people speaking out of hurt. And then those who are feeling like they're being accused of that hurt, pushing back. So it's like, okay, let's just all say that we're all hurt, and it is bad. And now let's leave those things behind and let's talk like people. And that's how I like to facilitate my conversations.
Yeah, well, I think that, that is obviously important. And again, one of the tensions that I see, especially when we're leaning into identitarianism, you hear these stories. I've talked with people on our podcast, and, it's like, you can't say that because you're a white person, or you can't say that because you're a cis person, or, blah, blah, blah. You've heard all of that. And shutting down that conversation, or that's a tenet of white supremacy, or, you've heard, I'm sure, all of that. And when we're working in that space where we're making it harder to have the conversation, and in our work, like I think that like critical race theory or critical theory is something that we should take seriously in the questions that it raises, and the ways in which we can think about things from different perspectives. But it can't be the only kind of perspective that we have. And that is where I start to draw lines of demarcation of like, okay, we want to hear from this group, including those who are sympathetic to sort of critical race theory, but they can't be the only voice. And so that to me is one of those lines of demarcation. We try to work with schools and think about how do we lean into the principles of liberal science and that sort of fallibilism and those kinds of things. And honestly, I think it's important to note that some of those folks who are sort of the founders of critical race theory, are in some ways sort of hostile to some free speech and kind of things. And, that doesn't mean that their ideas shouldn't be heard. But as we think about how we engage and sort of figure out what we know, what we understand, and our shared knowledge, I think that tension with freedom of expression and freedom of speech really becomes a problem. So I'm wondering if any reactions to that, and as an extension of that, have you had any pushback from folks in your community? I mean, so I suppose there's some selection bias to the students and the parents that you have. Do you have parents and maybe even kids that push back on some of the stuff that you're talking about?
So yes, that's a lot. I like to go back to the educating the education and understanding. Like a lot of us throw words around that we don't even understand what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Critical race theory being one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Even I don't understand what it is because it's not being taught in K12 schools.
Right.
This is college level things. So I'm not going to even go there because many people think that they're being taught in our schools and they aren't. It isn't. So I do know that. So I'll only speak to what I do know. When to answer a little more general. Well, first off, you said something about how like the people are saying, well, that is this and that is this, and so now we're silencing the conversation, and people are feeling like, oh, I can't say that, and because it's wrong.
Yeah,
we have to acknowledge that we all that are on this earth today, that are living in this world, have inherited systems. That's a fact. Like, we have inherited whatever our parents have built, whatever our grandparents have built. We just got here. So as we just get here, we are here to navigate what we have inherited. And to assume that we have only inherited good things, to me, is thoughtless. We've inherited good, bad, ugly, wonderful, and our kids will inherit what we do and what we bring. So I will always acknowledge that there are systems that we have inherited, period. I'm 43 years old. So like, I've only been here since the 80s, right? But I also will say, yes, pushback. When there is pushback, I try to understand what that person needs, what that person needs to understand. I don't like to have contentious conversations. I don't like to do that in any space. I just like to navigate, well, what is it you're understanding? Oh, yeah. And understanding that people feel differently because everybody has a different perspective. And that's great. And that's okay. But as long as we lead with empathy and we accept that both things can be true. Like, you can be right in saying, well, that feels like you're making it my fault. Where that person's just saying, well, I'm historically marginalized and I've run across these microaggressions every single day. Both can be true. So, you know what I mean? Just being able to understand that we've inherited systems, things are happening, and let's fight to make it better so that our kids can do better than what we're doing. So pushback isn't a thing for me because it's just tackling an issue and trying to move forward in a healthy way.
Yeah, well, one of the things you sort of referred to it, like the idea that somebody might be, I guess, feeling guilty for their I guess, actions of their ancestors or things like that. To me, that's a very odd sort of way to think about it. I mean, it wasn't me. It happened to be people with similar colored, pigmented skin. It's like, why would I feel bad about, I mean, I acknowledge those things were bad, but like that's not my fault, right? Nor is it, any more than it's your fault,
Right. That is the approach. That is why people are having a hard time having these conversations. And that's why people are pointing at people and pointing back, because they're owning it as though they're doing it.
Right. Well, that's the identitarianism that I find. It's like this downward spiral. It's like, okay.
Yes.
Once we get away from that, I know we're up against a time. I want to make sure of a couple things. One, that you can share any things that you haven't talked about and links and things like that. But can you talk a bit about, like, what does your day-to-day work look like? And you're talking about, putting together the sort of performing arts work that you're talking about, the DEI stuff, the belonging, the inclusion, all of that kind of thing. Like, what's the sort of brochure look like of your work and your day and how that manifests in that day-to-day work?
Yes, I really love being able to have the autonomy to create programming that I think will fit this community. And that's probably the main reason I'm here, is because they don't tell me this is what it needs to look like and this is what it needs to look like. They say, well, what do you think it should look like? And one of the programs that I did start here were interest, alliance, and affinity tables, or groups. What that means, a lot of people, there's been pushback against affinity. Well, that's not cool. You're separating all of the kids, all of the Asian kids from the other kids. That's not fair. That doesn't look good. No, let's build up to that and understand why it matters. So we start with interest group. Who has similar interests? Who loves skiing? Who loves snowboarding? Who loves cross-country skiing? Who loves horses? Who loves hot takes. So we have different groups where the kids sit and they talk based on their interests. And so that feels cool. Like, that's not threatening. Nobody has a problem with that. Kids talk all the time about that. And they get a chance to be with people of similar interests. Then we go to an alliance table where it's like, there are causes or groups of people that they want to be an ally or advocate for, like climate change, environmental challenges, homelessness, people from the LGBTQIA plus community, but Black, Indigenous, people of color, or what's another one? People with mental health challenges, people with disabilities. Everybody is drawn to be an ally to different causes or groups, and so I bring the kids together to talk about how they can support these groups. That's not problematic. That's exciting, and it gets together and makes the world a better place. And then the next level is identity. How do you identify? Who do you identify with? And they choose these. So firstborn child, only child, international student, Chinese student. What do we have? We have members of the LGBTQIA plus community. We've got Christian. So everybody has a group that they identify with that matters to them, and they're able to be with their people. And so I get to run that. And that's just during lunch, having casual conversation during lunch where they can kind of like find that, and then everybody goes and does their thing. But to be able to find commonalities with people, I think, is important. So I do that. I offer a critical conversations class where I teach the students how to talk to each other across these lines. As we were just talking about, one of the big skills that we have lost is being able to communicate with each other. So in our critical conversations class, we talk about what is the best way of communicating with each other around difficult topics. We do a lot of programming, outreach to see what the community is doing and sharing. There's so many cool things that I get to do here. And as I said, I've only been here a year and a half, but I really hope to lock some things down to where these things will supersede me.
So one quick question, and maybe you can answer this quickly. So like with those affinity groups, and I've seen versions of it, and it does strike me as like visually odd. Like, okay, so we are sort of segregating, right? Like that feels a little bit unsettling, right? And
depends on the person, depending. So that would be the perspective of somebody who's not used. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I just need to clarify that.
Yeah.
That feels exciting to be with people that look like me, because most of my day is not something like that. But to somebody who spends most of the day where everybody looks like them and now they're moving somewhere else, that could be unsettling.
Yeah, well, my unsettledness, the unsettledness isn't based on that. It's just the idea of, we've segregated and the idea of just that sort of concept of segregation. It's like, ooh, wait, what? We're doing segregation again, right? Which isn't exactly what you're talking about, but just that sort of like just the concept of it. But the quick question I wanted to ask, and I know we don't have much time, is so like the LGBTQ, and I'm gonna get the rest of it. It's added on to many times. Is somebody able to? Because one thing that I wonder about is like that's a large group of very disparate kinds of identities, right? Gay people and trans people and lesbians are, essentially quite different. So can somebody sort of talk about those differences or, sort of break out from that? So like, I don't want to be a part of that large group of alphabet, numbers and things. I want a group that is, for gays and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be the dream. That would be the dream, because they're not all the same. Just like Black people are not a monolith, but even more so with all those different letters. Like, yeah, that would be the dream, to be like, yeah, I'm definitely gay, but I don't understand what the trans people are doing, so I want to be with my people. So like, yeah, that would be the dream. We are 4th through 9th, so it's very we do it developmentally appropriate, and we do have members of that community. We have people who are trans students, young students, and we have students who are gay. So yes, that would be. Yeah.
Well, I know you've got to go. The website is northcountryschool.org, and we'll put that in the show notes. Anything else you want to mention or talk about before we jump off?
No, I'm glad we kind of went there. We went there with a lot of places things. So I hope it works out for what you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for the conversation.
Yeah. All right.
What we need to do is spend enough time together that we can start to translate our ideas into each other's language and include one another in this community of inquiry. And that is the work of love.